So,
Rhonda,
without
thank you.
further ado, welcome to the Jackhammer Effect.
Look at this.
Jackhammer Effect is a brainchild of Mr. Myron Welik here, and it's aimed to bring in the best of the best in the business world every 2 weeks to answer your most pressing questions during these unfortunate times that we live in. So, without further ado, I'm going to give it to Myron, and he will be introducing our guest.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Joe, I have to, first of all, guys, Joe does all the tech stuff, and anybody who knows me out there, if it wasn't for Joe, you wouldn't be seeing me right now. We'd be, it would be either pre-COVID or we wouldn't be doing it, because that's about the extent of my tech knowledge. Unfortunately, it's enough. So thank God for Joe, and I cannot even emphasize that enough. But anyways, that's also why I partnered with him. It's what I do best. So I have to confess that, you know, Jonathan is a dear mentor and friend. So I've got to know him extraordinarily well over the last several years. And we just kind of met the way I do everything else. Went to his meetup years ago, well, 3-4 years ago, and just built a relationship from there. I have to say, my experience with Jonathan and seeing him with other people and friends and colleagues, associates, is that he's certainly one of the most generous people I've ever met. And I'm not talking about money. I mean, he, and you guys are in for a treat. Guys who know him, people who don't know him, in terms of his knowledge, his experience, not only is it eclectic, but unlike me, it's extraordinarily logical. And I think his communication skills is incredible. So, and he's been very helpful. So I think this is, you know, this speaks to what I envision this whole thing to be, guys, is an opportunity or a platform for people to speak to people that maybe they don't normally get to speak to, or they don't have that opportunity to speak to. And that's what we hope to do here at the Jackhammer Effect. So already I took too much time. Welcome, Jonathan. Again, thank you very much, buddy, for being here. Really appreciate it. As the platform, it's open for questions. Joe, start going.
Sure. So Jonathan, my first question to you would be, any business who's starting up, there's two things that they need to concentrate amongst everything else. The first one being a product market fit, and the second thing being a market validation. Now, these two are completely two separate topics to discuss upon, but from your point of view, for a startup, which one should they take the most closest look at when they are starting up, whether it be the product market fit or the market validation?
Honest to God, if you are not focused on solving a real problem for real people, you're not going to succeed. So, you know, there's a lot of jargon that gets thrown around, product market fit and market validation. I will often tell people that they need to start talking to real people about real pain. Because until I can speak to a potential customer in their language, such that my words are resonating in their soul, that they self-identify that I understand their problem, I'm not going anywhere as a business. Your first biggest hurdle, if you don't do the right things, is when you finally try and launch this business and no one is paying attention. And this is usually the first time that I get called in, because no one's clicking on the ads and they're just not making the revenue. Why? Because they're calling a migraine mildly irritating. You know, if you don't speak the language that your customers speak, if you don't recognize their pain as severe and intense because those are the words they use, then you haven't done your homework. You're speaking Spanish when they're speaking French. It's just not going to connect. So first and foremost, get out there and talk to your potential audience. Make sure that they really are the right people for you to talk to. Make sure you're talking to the buyers, not just the users, because they're not always the same person. You know, and the buyers got their unique problems. I mean, I would focus on that. Forget, even though technically we're talking product market fit, forget that term, forget product validation. Just go out there and find a problem that you truly understand and that you can solve. It's really not that complicated.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I would now ask any one of our members to please go ahead and ask their questions to Jonathan. Thank you.
Well, I would have one. It's just a very general question. Jonathan, nice to meet you. I actually don't know who you are, and I would love for you to just give a 2-minute introduction about yourself, what you do, and how you got there.
Sure. So I've spent the last 30 years in high tech. I started out as a developer and software architect, team leader, head of development, product manager, head of product management, usually working for software companies that were building commercial software for large scale enterprises. So the Rolodex customers that I used to build products for, FedEx, Netflix, eBay, France Telecom, Bosch, nuclear power plants, PG&E, large banks, insurance companies. The industry didn't matter so much. I was largely building tools for monitoring web performance or for doing IT automation, very highly technical stuff, and being sold to large enterprises. And the single biggest realization through all of that was that even though you're building a technical product for a technical crowd, you can't sell it based on its technical features. It still comes down to, why did he get up out of bed this morning? What was the problem that was keeping him awake at night? Because he didn't roll out of bed thinking about your company and your product. He had a different problem in mind, right? And we didn't really solve our challenges in our sales until we understood that. So anyway, to continue the brief synopsis, I left doing B2B and I started up my own software company and got pretty close to successfully launching a really good product, but made a lot of critical mistakes along the way. Even with 20 years experience by that time, I still was making critical mistakes. And I was looking around for good help for people who were just starting out, and there really wasn't any. The accelerators, the incubators, the books, they all kind of assumed that you were already pretty far along, that you sort of knew what your business plan was, and they were trying to help you get to the next step. But who helps you get to that step? And so I started up an educational meetup. I wasn't finding any meetups terribly helpful, so I started a different one. And largely interviewing entrepreneurs, where the audience were people who wanted to become entrepreneurs. And that was really successful for about 2 years. And that became my second business. And I'm still engaged in that. So I do consulting work for the stock exchange and other large companies. And I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and startups. So that's my story.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have a question for
Yes,
yes?
I do. Hi, Jonathan. This is Martin.
Hey.
Hi. Long time. Sorry, no camera for me today.
Oh, man.
You're not missing much. I want to talk about the rate of change. The rate of change is increasing. The generation between products is shorter. What separates me from my parents is very little compared to what separates me from my children.
Yep.
When we look at features, products, what is good advice to cope with an ever-increasing rate of change in the marketplace, technologically, but also socially, everything that affects product adoption?
So the thing that I did, I was working for a company in Paris, and they had a 25-year-old product and they needed to modernize it. And I mean, like, they had COBOL in the core of the code. It was that bad. And this company was running nuclear power plants. So you kind of want this stuff to work. And so we did a fairly simple thing. I put in what I called a solution partner program, but essentially it's bringing customers directly into your development cycle. So if you're doing agile development, which I'm assuming any company that's worried about rate of change is going to be doing, so that you're able to release features every 2 weeks if you get it right, if you're doing it really well. But instead of just having your product owner constantly going back and forth, between the customer and the team. Bring customers into the team. So that means for people who are familiar with Agile, at the end of every 2-week development cycle, you've got a demo. I want customers in that demo. Every planning session, I want customers in those planning sessions. Every 2 weeks, what the team's going to do for the next 2 weeks, the customer should be there, helping to prioritize that work. If there are key changes coming up, your customers are going to know before you're going to know. And if there's a key technology change that isn't meaningful to them, then you shouldn't pay attention to it. There's a lot of red herrings, and there's a ton of stuff that your competitors are going to do just to knock you off balance. Particularly in the B2B market, this happens all the time. These guys are sitting on a pile of money. They'll throw a casual, $500,000 to build some feature that they know you're going to have to chase after them for. They might just be putting a bell or whistle on their product, and you're suddenly running after it. And it's a waste of time. You want to get ahead of them. And the only people who are going to help you do that are the customers, right? So I find customers bring enormous clarity really quickly. And if you bring them directly into the development cycle, even in the case of rapid change, customers don't like rapid change. No one wants to change their phone every 2 weeks. So it's really about cutting out the noise of rapid change and focusing on the change that the customers are paying attention to, right? So I will often say your customers will have every answer you're looking for. They've got it. You just need to talk to them more.
Thank you. Very insightful.
Oh, hi, Jonathan. Romeo here speaking.
Hey, Romeo.
Just have a quick question for you. You mentioned that you made some critical mistakes, and you made some even though you had 20 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been a time where you made a bad mistake which turned out great, and vice versa, a good mistake that turned out to be bad?
A good mistake. So I will give an example of what most people would have considered a mistake, but I was making a bet, essentially, and I didn't know how it would work out. So I had a very technical product I'm in charge of, and I'm short on product managers, and I need a new one, and I'm not being given very much of a budget to hire somebody. I was cut back to $40,000 a year. That was the salary I could offer. And normally a product manager, has to have some technical experience, and then they become a product manager, and then you get a couple of years experience there, and then there's somebody that you would like. I couldn't do that. And we started doing interviews, and the people coming in were terrible. So I had the HR person remove all the technical skills, because for me, a good product owner, it's all about the soft skills. I need somebody who can talk to customers, make the customer like them, somebody who can speak in the voice of the customer, somebody who's a good communicator, a generally happy, upbeat person that an angry customer will not stay angry at, somebody who can build relationships. And to be honest, I always want to excise the technical part of any product owner's brain, because they keep second guessing the solution, right?
Yes.
So I whittled out all the technical requirements, and the HR person jokingly said to me, "Oh, well, I know a girl in the coffee shop downstairs who would be a perfect fit, ha, ha, ha." I said, "Really? Bring her in." And
Yes.
she said, "You're kidding me." I said, "No, I'm dead serious. Bring her in."
Yes.
And I met her. Magnetic. I went to watch her at work before she came in.
Yes.
A high stress morning rush environment. She is happy as a clam. Her colleagues are running around sweating. She's happy as a clam, joking with the customers, having a great time. Yes. I'm like, "Oh, I want this girl. This girl's gonna be perfect." And she came in, and during the interview, she had to go to the bathroom to throw up from nervousness. She'd never worked in a tech company before. She'd barely worked in an office before. She'd been a temp in an office before.
Yeah.
And so I made allowances for the fact that she was nervous. She did well in the interview. And we brought her in with 35 other candidates going through phone interviews and live interviews. And I didn't give her any preference. I didn't tell the team that I was giving her any preference. And the team met her and loved her. They voted her as the best candidate. And so I now had to convince my boss, who thought I was insane.
Yes.
And so I hired her. After about a year of meltdowns, she turned into one of the best product managers I'd ever hired. But you would have had glimpses of that during the first year. She required a lot of mentoring, and I paired her with someone who was really good.
Yes.
But just to give you an example, in her third month, we had a customer conference. The company did this big thing in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
And she had already met some customers on the phone, and I arrived with her at that conference, at that hotel at 10 at night. And we went to the bar and, had a drink. And while she was sitting there, she recognized the voice of contact at FedEx and spun around in her chair. And that was the last time I saw her. When I left, she was surrounded by people. When I met her in the morning, we crossed the lobby to go get breakfast, and she was high-fiving everybody and knew everyone's name. And I was like, who are you? This is insane. She was brilliant. She was so good. But it was just about building her confidence that she was able to do the job she was clearly able to do. Yeah. That's really what it was. But it was a huge risk, and it would have been my ass on the line if she had screwed up and failed.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Based on all of the changes, obviously, the global changes that are happening in terms of, yes, we don't do physical meetups and whatnot.
Hopefully, yes.
Well, hopefully we'll get back to that eventually.
Yeah, I know. When we have good treatments.
Of course. But what do you see the trends being in terms of, and also how business and technology are kind of, what do you see trending towards the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, so if you're talking about the way that we work, I'm still waiting for somebody to come up with the obvious. So here's an idea for anyone who wants to pursue it. I would like to see a piece of software come out that solves the problem for people who need a social environment when they work. Because to be honest, I don't think we're going to go back to working in commercial office spaces. I really don't think so. The people who want to do it are the people who don't like being home alone, right? So there are 2 ways to solve that. The first is, imagine that we have a scenario like what we have right now. I'm speaking and I'm staring at myself. That's ridiculous, right? I'm staring at me. I don't need to see me. I'm not impressed with me. I don't want to see that. But imagine that I could see my desktop and I could work, and on the side of my screen, I have my top 5 favorite colleagues that I work with all the time. I've got a live video feed to them. I can't quite hear what they're doing. I hear muffled sound, as I would in an office, right? Having them there and perfectly silent is unnatural. Having them there and muffled is a lot more natural. I get an office kind of a hubbub going, and maybe they're even slightly blurred, right? I can still have the social interaction of seeing that people change their haircut, or they're not looking so good today. If I want their attention, what do I do in an office? I wave at them. Okay, so if I click on their video link, then I'm waving at them. If they want to wave back, then they can become clear. I'll become clear for them. They become clear for me, and now we can have a conversation. And when we're done with that, I can let them go back to their default mode of being in their sort of bubble, right? If I had that, I would feel a lot more sociable during the day. I'm hanging out with my colleagues while I'm working, right? For people who find working from home to be a distraction because they have kids, they have pets, they have Netflix, whatever it is. All right, I would like to see the struggling co-working industry go out to the suburbs and the residential areas. I would like co-working to start soliciting companies, not startups, not entrepreneurs. Those people don't have the money. Go to large companies and say, your workforce working from home can come to our location. It looks like an office. We've got printers and we've got coffee machines. We've got other people who are dressed for business sitting at their desks. They are in an office environment and they've got their colleagues on their screen. So for the people who want to step out of their home into a more office-like environment, co-working can pick that up. Not a problem. Now, if that were to happen, then you've got a situation for people who like being in an office. Okay, you don't have to commute to downtown. The office can be at the local co-working spot, not a problem. People who want to work from home but need sociability, you've got your 5 people. People who want to work from home and be cave trolls don't have a top 5. It's fine. And for people who have no ties, why are you working from here? Why aren't you working from Miami? Why aren't you working from Mexico? Why aren't you earning Canadian dollars and living in Indonesia? It would make a lot more sense. And if that were to happen, then the concept of core hours kind of disappears, right? Core hours now become the hours that the team agrees to. It means that companies can now hire internationally without a problem, because it used to be, oh my God, outsourcing people working remote, such a problem. Well, it's not a problem now. So I would expect that 3 to 5 years from now, commercial real estate is going to completely be decimated. Sorry. Teams are going to be formed virtually around their own concept of core hours. You may have core hours for 3 hours in the morning and then 3 hours in the evening, because that's what works for the team. And you take your middle of the day and be with your family, or go walk on the beach, or do whatever it is you want to do.
Well, in my case, I work West Coast hours, even though I live on the East Coast, because I have customers in Europe and in the States on the West Coast. So
right.
It goes
So,
across the board.
Exactly. So, you start forming virtual teams. So I was working with a startup where she had recruited people. She had one guy in Croatia, one guy in Egypt, another guy in BC, and one guy here. It was a completely virtualized team. And they found their own core hours when they would go online and ask questions of each other. And these were developers. You would think there'd have to be high coordination. Not that much, actually. So long as they agree on their touch points, they were fine. And they set their own hours. The biggest problem was the guy in Croatia lived in a village and the electricity kept going out. So he'd be on a meeting and suddenly he's gone,
And what about the client end of this? Like, kind of meetups and meeting people and networking and kind of, obviously you can build your following and whatnot, but expanding that would be, how would you kind of approach that at this point?
It's the same thing. If I need, so for example, how often do I have customers who live in the same city that can come to my office and attend a meeting? Almost never. Never happens. We deal with that now. Right? And if my entire team, like the most irritating thing about conference calling before was you had a bunch of people in a room and then there was you. And if you're speaking, they can't hear you because they've got local chatter going on. This actually works better. Everybody is remote, right? So now we're on an even level in terms of how we're communicating. I can easily throw a customer into a meeting like this. Again, it's just about coordinating the hours. Right? And if I'm looking for a product owner, or let's say I'm the product owner for a company and we've got a new customer and the guy's in California, you know what? I don't have to be here for 3 months. I'll go to California, I'll work from there. It's because it doesn't matter to anybody where I am. All right? I can easily just relocate myself closer to the customer and at least closer to the time zone. If we're making a big push towards Europe, well, fine, I'll just go and relocate to Europe temporarily. Airbnb. So one of the things I expect to see is much more month-by-month accommodations where something like Airbnb comes up, but specifically because you've got a mobile workforce that needs to spend a month over here, a month over there, a month over here, right? There are people that live this way now. We call them digital nomads. And they're always looking for fully furnished places that they can rent month by month, and they might leave, whenever they need to. We need an Airbnb that is specifically set up month by month. So a bunch of those things I would see happen. And I would expect more people would work in their neighborhoods, stay in their neighborhoods. More people might move to small towns, to be honest. More green space. If you're worried about a second pandemic, you definitely want to be in the country.
Land's less expensive,
Yeah.
better building opportunities.
Yeah. Better housing, more green space. And it's not going to matter if you're generally working from home anyway. Nice local community. So I would expect a decentralization of cities, to be honest. And then now think about it from this aspect. Do you really need your car? I would expect that under these kinds of conditions, Montreal could simply ban all cars and replace them with, assuming we get this far, self-driving vehicles. And all the self-driving vehicles are there specifically to shuttle people around, much like elevators in the building. We've got a fleet of self-driving vehicles that are constantly repositioning themselves in the city so that they can pick people up like that, drop them off like that. Don't need a car.
Or something like Communauto, where you're using a smaller pool of dedicated cars, but you can, because if you want to go to somewhere very specific or groceries or what have you.
You could, but if I really wanted to reinvent traffic in the city, I wouldn't let people drive. I would have a fleet of self-driving vehicles. At that point, you don't need traffic lights. You just need pedestrians arrive at a corner, click a button, they're allowed to cross. The vehicles will all stop, because they're all in the same system. If I really wanted to change the city, first thing I would do.
Hey, Jonathan, as we're going on towards the end of the time, I just had a question for you. You described yourself as an entrepreneur at the beginning, and for some of us that are starting, I wanted to see, like, in your mind, what sets apart successful entrepreneurs versus those who give up, fail, or never get started?
The fact that they give up. Successful entrepreneurs don't give up. That's really what it comes down to. So let me say this. People assume that if you've succeeded once, you'll always succeed. I've seen successful entrepreneurs fail miserably their second time out, and then again their third time out. Being successful doesn't mean that you've figured out some magic formula. Every time you do this, it's going to be different. So the difference between somebody who's successful and somebody who's not is that somebody who is successful is somebody who understands there's a difference between falling down and failing, right?
Good one.
If you fall down, that's fine. But if you quit, then you failed. If you completely destroy your financial situation, then you may end up failing, because it may be 10 years to recover before you get back. But a successful entrepreneur simply keeps going. There's this awesome phrase that I was told very early on that basically said, if you want to be successful, just don't die. Just don't die. You want to live forever? Don't die. And
sorry, I just need to interrupt and say that we have just 1 more minute left.
Okay, so I will say that even Forbes magazine would tell you that if you make it past your 5th year of business, you will survive. Make it past year 5. There's a reason why it's year 5, but that would take too long to explain.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was amazing. We are towards the end of our meeting today. So a big round of applause to everyone who came today, who participated, who took their time and met us. Jonathan, thank you so much for sparing your valuable time to come onto this platform and answering everyone's questions. It was amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I'll leave Myron to do the final closing statements.
Myron,
you're on mute.
You're muted, Myron.
Classic.
Whatever, it's classic. I think it's very, It's got everything to do with it. You know, it's exactly what John says. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So he's absolutely right. You keep going. And one thing you do, you can't belabor the failures. You keep going. As long as you're physically okay and health-wise, everything's possible. The only real problem is if the health kicks in. That's a problem. But to me, that's the only thing that could stop you. So with that, John, a million thanks. Joe, a million thanks. Everybody, so appreciate you guys coming, really. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Look out for us.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Stay
Thank
safe.
you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.